I only hear my soul wasting away in autumnal deliverance of
Laughing
Sweden and lutefisk, the gory lutefisk, and so sad with metal and paint. My eyes, they weep for lutefisk. Salty umami tastes, the periphery of my discovery.
Mike, I've missed you so much on a microphone. You know that, right?
I love you too, Joe.
And if you think the apostle in triumph is heir apparent, then you are ready for this episode of Discography Discussion. I am Joe. That is Dan. That is Mike.
Hello.
I'm feeling very old school tonight, Dan.
Yeah, it's a little old school.
Just a little tiny bit.
Yeah.
You think I should pan us left and right like we used to back in the day?
No.
I mean, I can do it.
No, I really would appreciate if you didn't.
I feel the soundscape expanding as we speak.
No, I'm good, man.
Okay, I'll put it back where it belongs.
Sounds good. We have a special guest tonight, Mr. Mike Yahne.
How you doing?
The man, the myth, the legend.
We got Mike to come down to talk about Opeth, which is a band that we all love.
So evil.
They are.
Is it as evil as Ghost?
Joe just switched that to the perfect track for me to say evil.
Ghost isn't evil, per se. We'll get into that later.
Ghost has fun. Ghost has fun.
Yeah.
I don't know if, satanic lyrics, especially that over the top, and them make basic. I've overheard interviews with them. They pull a very Slayer-ish kind of mystique about it. Whereas Opeth...
Slayer, that Catholic band?
Yeah, I know, right? Whereas you look... Mike Yahne in interviews, he just gets this little twinkle in his eye that just speaks of mountains, of millions of corpses piling up. And of course, this is just... Opeth just feels evil. It's a
regular Tuesday.
Yeah, you know.
For the band.
In Sweden.
The sun never shines in Sweden.
Especially on a Tuesday.
Right.
It's very cold.
All right, now that we've got that out of our system, Opeth.
Where did you find out about Opeth, Dan?
Well, I found out about Opeth via message boards back in... Had to have been probably like 2002? Maybe 3.
That's going back a few years.
Yeah, it's a few minutes ago, but, you know... I got into Opeth basically off of hearsay. Because I think around that time, the latest album that had been released by Opeth was Deliverance.
Yeah.
And so the band was very hyped as this like great death metal band, and I was getting into more extreme metal at that time. So I really was intrigued by people saying that, you know, this is literally the best band that exists in this genre and all that. However, they didn't really end up sounding how I expected them to sound, because when people say somebody's the greatest death metal band ever, I'm thinking like Cannibal Corpse with actual melody.
Well, you're thinking death metal, which Opeth has strands of, but
right.
When you're led to like, this is the best death metal band ever, you're not going to imagine Opeth.
No, I wasn't prepared at all. And to make it even more confusing, the first album that I got by Opeth was Damnation.
That was the first one of theirs, because I actually learned about it from you shortly after you found out about it. The senior year of high school, and you showed me Damnation out of all of them. And I was thinking, well, this is okay. And then I listened to Deliverance, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's the gravy.
So Damnation is so pretty.
Damnation is really nice. And it was weird when I heard it, because I was like, this is not death metal. You know, This is my very first, like, metal elitist comment, you know. I listened to it on headphones. Metal. I listened to it on headphones in the dark, in the woods. And
in the woods.
After about 10 minutes, I was like, this is not death metal. And
way to be the stereotype on that one, Dan.
Well, you know, it wasn't death metal, but it was very mesmerizing.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed that about it. And we'll get into it whenever we actually talk about the album Damnation, but... Yeah, so Opeth goes back a little while for me. You know, I wasn't there at the beginning. I didn't buy Orchid day one at midnight at Best Buy on New Release Tuesday.
I think we would have had to have been Swedish, or at least British, or in the European sphere for that to work.
We had to have been, probably have to have been in Europe to have heard that when it first came out. And as a matter of fact, I think Orchid wasn't even released until
In
like
the US, it
later,
was
right?
released
Like, didn't
later,
it get an international release after Morning Rise?
I think so. I would love to hear some of our listeners' comments on this. If we can find like some old grizzled guy in a cave who says that, "Yep, Orchid got the copy right here."
Well, Mike, there is a guy that has been streaming our show from what is it, Joe? Like a Windows 98 Windows PC?
Somewhere over in the vicinity of Bangkok or Japan.
Okay.
All right.
Lots of caves in that area.
Oh, that fella,
So I'm thinking
Bangkok, Japan, much lesser known than Bangkok, Thailand, obviously. So he's got that on his street cred too.
Yeah, or her. We don't know.
Oh, it's true.
We don't know. So,
Should not be like
if
that.
that's you, if you're listening right now, I mean, hit us up. Send us an AOL instant message.
With a screenshot. I want proof.
Yeah, something cool. Like, show us your cave, show us your computer. We're just kidding. We appreciate you listening to our show.
We know where you live.
Well, before we start talking about people's caves, I want to take this time to say thank you to everyone for listening to the podcast. Thank you for listening and for subscribing. If you are not a subscriber, you can find everything Discography Discussion at discussmetal.com. We are on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, so if you have an Amazon Echo or Google Home, you have no excuse. Ask it to play the latest episode of the Discography Discussion podcast, and it will. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter at Discuss Metal. Be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe. It really helps us out. It lets us know you're listening. And now Dan is going to tell you all about 5-star reviews.
We love 5-star reviews here on Discography Discussion. We like reviews in general. If we're awesome, leave us a 5-star review. If we suck, leave us a not that star review. So, one of the cool things that we've done recently is we have added functionality to our Facebook page to make it easier for you. Instead of having to go on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review, which you are more than welcome and encouraged to do, you can now go to www.facebook.com/discography discussion, and you can leave us a review right there on Facebook. Make sure to leave us a comment and give us a follow on there. And, that the cool thing about following people on Facebook is that whenever we post something, you get it. You get it right away. You get the latest news, the latest updates. So we appreciate you guys. We actually just surpassed 233 likes on Facebook, which was a pretty big accomplishment. It was hard getting over that 200 hump. So we really appreciate you guys liking us and following us. And, make sure to leave us plenty of feedback. And reviews are a great way to let us know how you think we're doing.
One of the major developments in 2018 is we did become members of the Amazon Affiliate Links program. So if you'd like to purchase any of the music that we talk about in any of these shows, we do put links down in the show notes that'll take you directly to the records. It does not change the price for you, and we get a little bit of kickback from that. We appreciate your support. And we're going to be talking about our Patreon subscribers later on in the episode. We got something special coming up. If you've been listening for the past couple weeks, you've heard about it, but we're going to talk about it just a little bit more. And now Mike is going to tell Joe and the listeners all about Opeth.
Opeth. In the beginning, there was Opeth, and this is my show now, so everyone better listen. This is Opeth, the Opeth, they're like from Sweden, and it's like, they really, really sold out with like, what was it? My Arm's Your Hearse. It was kind of like new metal, so I just stopped listening to them after that.
Damn.
That's what certain Opeth fans look like if you go on certain message boards.
Absolutely.
That I will not name. To me, it's, especially having found out about these guys mainly during the Blackwater Park years, it's just, Damnation, Deliverance years technically. But that stuff was just so good. And going back and listening to old stuff, it was sort of like, okay, this is nice. It's not bad. But, oh, God, I mean, stuff that comes later.
Is Blackwater Park still the definitive Opeth record, or has that been surpassed at this point?
I think everyone would have a different answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, later on in the show, I'll make a strong case for Deliverance.
Deliverance is pretty solid.
But, then they drop a record like Ghost Reveries right afterwards, and it's like, fuck it, this band needs to hit their peak and start declining at some point, or else my brain's going to just...
I used to say that Deliverance was my favorite, but I think I've listened to Ghost Reveries way more, honestly.
Yeah.
And it's not just because of the occult kind of symbolism that keeps on creeping up, which has always been I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff.
Sucker for the occult. So.
Lots of Faustian references in there, especially Bang of the Hounds and whatnot.
Sure.
So, it's good stuff.
So I guess let's start at the beginning, just like we always do.
1995, Orchid.
Okay.
Orchid is a really interesting record because it has a lot of weird elements in it that really don't show up in other Opeth albums, except for Morning Rise, because like Morning Rise and Orchid are essentially the same record.
Very similar. Morning Rise is slightly bluesier in places, from what I remember.
Orchid is probably the closest thing you could say that is the closest you could say Opeth got to Swedish death metal or melodic death metal or whatever you want to call it. Like this is
that kind of Gothenburg tinge,
a little
if not
bit.
Actually,
like
Gothenburg.
they were in that scene, but they didn't really sound like that.
Yeah.
And I think Michael Åkerfeldt, he said it on a DVD that I have one time. Whenever they were playing a couple of the songs from Orchid, and he's like, "Okay, that's enough of that minstrelly shit." And I agree with him there. So these songs have almost kind of a little bit of a folk tempo.
Oh, definitely.
And they're not,
Baroque
it's not
kind of sensibility to them.
Yeah, it's not blast you in the face or anything, or beat you over the head with like heaviness. But the vocals are extreme, almost a little black metal-ish on this one, a little bit more higher register, and he screams, he sings. Michael Åkerfeldt is an excellent singer, as well as aggressive vocalist, and he doesn't go too much into the melodic singing on the first record, but these songs are kind of a good introduction to what Opeth was going to be all about. I mean, every song is way longer than it should be. The songs are interesting. They have a lot of different elements. There's a lot of progressive metal in there. There's a lot of folk metal, if that's a thing. I don't know if folk metal is really a thing.
I don't really think that folk metal would apply to this so much, just because it's much less. Folk metal to me seems to be a lot about incorporating other instruments, like non-electronic instruments. Oftentimes the lyrical content can be, harkening back to kind of like an idealized version of the past. You don't really see that so much with Opeth, not even the early stuff.
Yeah, and when I say folk, I really just mean the tempo. There's just something about the way...
I get what you're saying
The way the songs kind of ebb and flow at the beginning, where they're just... Especially on the very first song, In the Midst She Was Standing.
Yeah.
That song has like a very kind of folksy tempo. Tempo only. I'm not saying that it's like they're not playing flutes and shit, but, it's really interesting to me. There's really good solo work on this record.
Yeah, like right here.
Yeah, and some piano in there. There's a really beautiful piano piece, which I think is like track 3. And I've been listening to the record on vinyl, so it's been hard to, I'm not just sitting there looking at the track names while I'm listening to it, even though that's what I should be doing. But I really like the vocals on this one, and I love the I just love the way the songs are put together. The only real issue I had with it is that the songs definitely... I mean, Opeth has always been a very diverse band and thrown a lot of different influences our way, and has always written long songs that are very interesting. But I think on this record, with it being their first record and them not being necessarily as great as they would become, some of these songs tend to drag on a little too long.
Well, there's a repetitive quality.
Yes.
Like the same riff, it'll be a beautiful sounding piece, but it'll be repeated over and over and over again. And you can get kind of sick of that after a while. There's a lot to be said to, having a beautiful sound last for only a few seconds and then recede, and then other things take over, and that just implants that feeling in people. If you know it, I don't know, it's...
No, I get what you're saying. It harkens back a little bit to...
Later albums are so much better at that than these.
Yeah. Yeah, and we talked about that repetitive quality. We touched on that in the Paramecium episode we did last week. That quality makes this record hard to get through 100%. If it's after 9 o'clock and I put this record on, I'm going to be asleep by 9:30.
Yeah.
It's not that it's boring. It's just a little too much in some areas. And that sucks, because I think sometimes you miss out on some of the cooler parts, because one of the biggest things they introduced on this record that would follow them throughout their career is the change of mood, or the change of tone, in the sense that these songs can go from being blisteringly fast and heavy and then suddenly just stop on a dime and go into like a 3 to 4 minute, medieval sounding acoustic segment, and then maybe he'll sing on it, maybe he won't, and those parts are really cool. But I feel like even though they are in abundance on this record, they're a little few and far between. Kind of all the shit that glues them together, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
It's like this starts and then this starts, as opposed to one thing kind of flowing seamlessly into another. Now, there is some flow there. One thing, you talk about signature sounds, like this sort of dark neoclassical, atmospheric quality. I think that's something that's always been there with Opeth. Like, Opeth sounds, and I don't know this is so much because of the album cover, for a lot of their albums, especially around the Blackwater Park era, but Opeth to me sometimes sounds like, and this is going to sound funny, it sounds like the way scary stories to tell in the dark illustrations look.
Interesting.
If anyone from our generation
original
remembers this is like ichor dripping from the pages almost. Very visceral, very haunting, terrifying illustrations. God knows how it ended up in a child's book, but it did.
For funsies, of course.
Opeth sounds like that looks to me.
I like the word medieval. I don't think I've ever heard Opeth described as medieval, but it seems like a brass or Bronze Age version of what heavy metal would sound like. You're not really focusing on being brutal as much as you're being as musical as possible, but then having a brutal quality with the vocals. And even the drums kick off and they're either going 100 miles an hour with double kick or they're just laying back and setting a groove.
Yeah.
I don't really enjoy this record very much, probably because I was jaded at the very beginning, because first thing I ever heard was Deliverance and Damnation. So you kind of have already experienced the peak of this band's songwriting capability that would go on to be repeated. You get to a point with Opeth where you think, okay, there's no possible way they're going to be able to do that again. And they've done it 12 times.
Yeah.
I don't know about 12 times, but they have done it a lot. And I think you said it best for all of us, Joe, when you said that because we'd heard what was to come later before hearing this does pale in comparison in a lot of ways. But I do think it's interesting to talk about in the sense that it is different. Like if you could divide the band into eras, this was definitely kind of the more medieval era. And whenever I say medieval, again, like I said,
well, it's just like that because you hear those courtly kind of sounds.
Yes,
into it.
yes. It's
and
not
someone who understands music history far better than I would probably be able to like pick out just what this is influenced by.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that a lot of Swedish folk melodies do make their way into this, and a lot of the sensibilities just from traditional music. I mean, they might not even be conscious. Whenever they're being played.
We'll talk about it a lot more as we go into the discography, but a lot of people accuse Opeth of being a progressive rock band with death metal vocals.
Yeah, I could hear that.
For some songs, I could definitely see that.
Why is it progressive? Because they don't detune, because they're not running the gain at 11, because the drums are not being hit as hard as possible, because they're able to lock in with a groove and then he happens to be growling over the top of it. I mean, it's very musical. And I get the same feeling from listening to Opeth from the music that I get from listening to Pink Floyd. You have these long separations of just one thing that's kind of repeated and built upon, and then the song changes. The only difference between the two is Opeth is death growling.
Right. The vocals often will shift people's perception of stuff. Like, there's been stuff that's obviously just doom or even thrash, but the vocals are raspy and black metal-y, so people will say, oh, that's black metal. So,
yeah. Well, and I think this record is not really the progressive one in the sense that, like we were talking about earlier with the songwriting, it sounds like all of these songs were just like, okay, we have this part, this part, this part, this part. You could write it you could illustrate it on a piece of paper visually.
And one thing I've noticed, correct me if I'm wrong, but for a lot of these, it'll go from one part to one part to one part, but it won't return to any parts in many places.
Right. So it's like we're going to do this part, this part, this part, this part, and then that's the end. That's not the same thing as music composition.
No.
That's what hardcore bands do. Like techie hardcore bands that often get labeled as tech bands. They just write a whole bunch of parts and then just kind of haphazardly throw them all together. You can hear a lot of that in Between the Buried and Me's discography, in the sense that their first few albums were similar to Opeth in the sense that they were just a collection of parts, not necessarily a collection of songs. And so I think that's really where the negative points come from me on Orchid. Is that it's obviously it's a great start. I've definitely heard way worse debut records.
Oh yeah.
You know, so this was a pretty good start for the band.
Like, we have to kind of dig to find anything wrong with Opeth, and a lot of this, again, just like Joe said, it comes from the perspective of having heard, something that's been so far down the line, and going back to kind of the unpolished, rough cut gem before it was really refined.
Exactly, and the last thing I can say about it, and then we'll go on to Morning Rise, is there's an era of Metallica that existed in the 80s. Kill 'Em All was the first thing they did. You can find a path from Kill 'Em All to every record they did in the 80s, but you would listen to Kill 'Em All and say, well, this isn't as well produced, it's not as clean, it's sloppy in places, but everything that makes the band great is right there, and I like it. And same thing for Orchid. It's not bad, it's just when you start off at an 8 and then you put out a bunch of 11s,
right?
It's like, yes, that 8 exists, but do I really want to listen to it as much as I could go listen to Blackwater Park?
Yeah, if it was any other band, Orchid would probably be more memorable, actually.
Probably, yeah.
You ready for Morning Rise, Dan?
Oh man, I was born ready.
1996.
Okay, well, out of the two, I like this one more than I liked Orchid. But the interesting thing about this is I think for a lot of the world, this was their debut album. I don't think that Orchid was necessarily available right away, or if it was, it wasn't easily obtainable. I think
they found an audience later, and then that audience discovered Orchid in the process.
Yeah, because I think Morning Rise was a little bit more like easier to obtain at that time. Like I said, I don't know. I wasn't there in 1996.
Yeah, this is stuff that
in Sweden.
I was 10. So
we are youngins here.
Yeah. So this record's interesting too because there's actually a few like riffs and parts. Yeah, I was talking about how the songs were written in parts. There's actually parts of Orchid songs in Morning Rise.
Yeah,
and that's interesting. And they even say it in the liner notes, like that. Hey, we took this from this song from Orchid and all that. Which says to me that maybe Orchid was just something that they put out as a proof of concept.
It could be. I mean, I think that Morning Rise is really the album where you start to see so many Opeth-y things come together, where you talk about atmospheric qualities to it, especially just the way that Black Rose Immortal, that 20-minute thing, fades out. That song, it's spine-tingling the way it ends. It's just these demonic shrieks that kind of just reverberate over and over and over again. That's something that to me was definitely lacking from Orchid.
Well, this one's a little heavier, I think is the way to put it. I don't mean heavier and like, it didn't just automatically start sounding like death or, stuff like that. It just kind of like, I don't know if it's better production. Maybe it's the heavier blues influence, because as we all know, blues, the bluesier you are, it's possible the heavier you are.
Damn right.
The more prog you are.
It's too prog. But yeah, no, this record's good. It appears to be shorter than Orchid, but it's really not. It's still a motherfucker of a playtime. I mean,
you got like what, 5? Was it 5 tracks?
I
One
mean,
of them was 20 minutes long.
The shortest song on this record, I think, is like what, 8 minutes.
8?
I know that's not even. Well, no,
and that's
that
the
sounds
ending.
about right.
That's Eternal Soul Torture, and that's not even part of the record. That's a bonus track. So like, Black Rose Immortal is 20 fucking minutes long. Advent is 13 minutes long. It's like, and everything else is at least a solid 10. And like, don't get me wrong, it's brilliant for the most part. I like most of it, but it is hard when you're just writing parts and you're not doing a musical composition.
Yeah, it still suffers from that repetition.
It's really, because somebody decided, hey, we're gonna play this 32 times.
Yeah.
When they could have played it 8 times.
Yeah.
And had the same effect.
And go back to it, and then maybe 2 different versions of it. Play something else in a different key, maybe. I don't know.
Correct. These don't really have like the musical concept of like tension and release.
Yeah.
That is kind of supposed to be like the basis of musical enjoyment. You have that tension and you have a relief of that tension, and it just kind of follows that pattern.
No, it's much more like, hey, look at this, and then hey, look at this, and then hey, look at this.
Right. So like, this is still kind of wanking around, but they are more They are more skillful on this one. I noticed the acoustic guitar playing is a huge step up from Orchid.
I mean, Orchid definitely had that too, but they not so much a part of the songs, it seems.
Correct. Yeah, and this record definitely is a step in the right direction. I wish that there was more that I could say about it, but a lot of what we said about Orchid applies to this record as well. I like Michael's vocals on this one more. The singing's better. The growls are starting to get a little deeper, just a tad. And actually enjoy his shrieks on these two records a lot. Like he shrieks, like does these
it's very primal. It's straight up from the guys. It's not filtered and anything. It's not plastered over, not prettied. I don't know. I'm just saying words at this point.
It's not produced is the thing. It's just that, but it sounds good, and it is different, like markedly different than it was on their later releases. I do think these songs go on a little too long. Not necessarily a bad thing, but like Orchid, I'm still falling asleep by 9:30 if I'm listening to this one, later than that time. So for that, I'm like, okay, it's really cool. And if I was awake and paying attention really closely, I would enjoy this more. So, but like I said, I'm not bashing it. Like I said, it's an 8. It's just not an 11. And
We're getting to the 11s.
An 8's still good, you know.
All right, 1998, My Arms, Your Hearts.
This is the beginning of a new era for Opeth. This record is heavy. It's faster. I mean, shit, it was put out on Century Black. That was the sub-label of Century Media for, like, really extreme bands.
That's interesting.
And, like I said, Cannibal Corpse this is not, but it's still, like, the primal screams are there, but the cool thing about this one is, like, Michael Ackerfeld really, really deepens it up on the vocals. His voice sounds commanding. These songs are heavier. I mean, the song "Demon of the Fall" is like absolutely, just
he
absolutely
really spits the words. It's great,
absolutely crushing. And I heard a little bit of the progressive rock on this one a bit, especially the intro where it just comes in the and like it reminded me very much of like a 70s acid rock kind of intro.
You think that at this point this is the album where they're maybe not quite so afraid to kind of show some of their influences that aren't strictly heavy metal?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like the other albums had different elements, but they were a little bit more like,
because now it's obvious, because the last few albums especially, but back then you got to think, oh, well, I really like the Moody Blues, but I don't want to say that at a show, man.
Right. I'll get killed. It's the 90s in Europe, and it's death metal, right? It all has to be death metal.
And satanic.
And super satanic.
Oh, yeah.
Which is kind of a running joke with Opeth in the sense that they are really kind of not.
No.
I mean, it's very tongue-in-cheek when it's there.
Didn't he just joke about pretending to be Satanist to play in certain places?
Yeah.
It's like certain bands who have pretended to be Christian to play at certain church events.
Right, whereas, like, I don't remember what interview that was with Michael, but he said that, like, oh, yeah. He's like, people would ask us if we were Satanists, before we went on, and we're just like,
sure.
Absolutely.
Sure, whatever.
Yeah, that's fine.
I remember when we saw them in Chicago, he popped up and said, "This is one of our earlier songs. You're really going to enjoy it. I mean, unless you absolutely hate death metal. It's okay if you do. I didn't like death metal."
It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
Of course, he could be just trolling his fans at that point, and I think there's a lot of that takes place later on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Can't blame him, though.
So one of the things that's really interesting about this is when I started paying attention to Opeth's lyrics. Because Orchid and Morning Rise are just fine lyrically. It's just that
it's fine.
They're not all that interesting. It's not like Swallow the Sun where we get some really cool song about him fucking a dead girl in the woods or something, That's
it always comes back to the dead girl in the woods.
You don't have anything cool like that in there, but that's okay. But this record is interesting, and this is just my own personal interpretation of these lyrics. I could be way off. I don't know what the intent was from the band, but I kind of get the impression that this record is about a ghost haunting someone. Like that.
How very King Diamond of you.
Yeah, a little bit. Like it definitely sounds like a lot of the songs have a kind of a quality to them lyrically where it seems like there is a living person in despair and this ghost is like trying to communicate with them. And it's interesting to me.
You could actually read that same exact description into quite a lot of Opeth albums to follow, though. Not albums so much as individual songs.
Sure.
With Watershed, there's always this feeling of oppression and this feeling of regret and remorse and something from the other side scratching at the periphery.
Right, and it's interesting with a band like this that actually, really you can actually feel genuine emotion whenever you listen to some of these songs and you do have the lyrics in there. Like the band, they do a really good job of communicating with you musically what the feeling was going in, and that's something that a lot of bands can't do because there's always this when you're playing an extreme music style, there's always this somewhat pressure for like it's an act.
Yeah,
we have to appear tough or
adding
scary
to that,
or whatever.
It feels less mechanical. I don't know if that's really an appropriate word to use, but it feels less planned in a way than the first two albums, and in a way that just makes it feel better.
It feels very, I like that, like organic, not mechanical, because we listen to a lot of mechanical bands. I mean, we talked about Meshuggah a few weeks ago, and that's very emotionless. I think at some point I said it sounds like music being played by robots.
Nothing wrong with that necessarily.
No, there's nothing wrong with it.
For certain styles of band, especially something that has more of a folksy character in some places. I don't want to say folksy. That's a bad term to describe.
We keep saying folk, but that's not really what we mean.
No. What's a good word for that? Of the earth.
Organic.
Emotional. It's emotion. Oh crap! It's emo.
Oh god, it's emo.
Burn it!
Burn it now.
Send that to Blabbermouth Joe.
Like I said,
what's fucking podcast called this band emo?
Toxic people have called Opeth emo, and it's just like, okay.
Wow, really?
Wow.
We have read these posts side by side, sir.
Jesus. Okay.
Back in the day.
Well,
this is the record. If you've listened to more than 4 of Opeth's releases, this is where I kind of started suspecting them of composing symphonies, because I started to hear, and to be clear, death metal symphonies, because I started to hear different movements, not just a pile of riffs thrown together and okay, we're going to play this and then we're going to play this and then we're going to play this. It really started to sound like, okay, right there, that was an adagio, and right here there's a toccata, and now we're doing a big overture at the very ending. And it was an interesting way to think about the music as I was listening to it, because it almost fully justifies being loud and having a groove and then just stopping and having a guitar break, and then going right back into something equally as heavy and loud and fast, and then doing it again.
And you felt this with My Arms, Your Hearse, Joe?
I did.
Okay, that's interesting.
This is where I started to notice it.
I like that way of thinking.
And it really starts to show on Blackwater Park. When we get to Watershed, it kind of changes to a different style of classical composition that I will save for later. Dan is going to be very upset.
Well, my band would say about that.
My Arms, Your Hearse is definitely in my top 3. There's just something about this record. I have a lot of trouble like putting a numerical value on any of them because they're all like, with the exception of the first 2. I kind of think a lot of the stuff after that was solid gold, and so it's really.
Well, it's also what mood you're in. I mean, if I'm in a more depressive mood, then I'm gonna go with either this or Still Life. If I'm in much more of an impish, mischievous mood, I might go for Watershed. Or Ghost Reveries, obviously.
Impish.
If I'm in a more emotional kind of like just, philosophical mood, then it's Blackwater Park and Deliverance and Damnation, all of those.
Damn, that's like 5 hours to have a mood.
Oh, yes. It goes places, you see. This music does transport you.
Right.
I mean, it'll change your mood, too. For better or for worse.
So, My Arms, Your Hearse, I fucking love this record. I wish I had something really profound to say about it, but I like the songs a lot. There's a lot more like returning of melodies. Like Joe said, the music sounds a lot more composed. I don't know shit about symphonies, so I'm going to leave it right there. But I think that these songs are more like songs and less like a collection of ideas, and for that I salute them.
Well, songs have to repeat in some way. No, not necessarily have to, but I think that our brains are just kind of wired to expect, not just choruses, but how different areas kind of remind us of other parts of the song. I don't know.
Recognition is enjoyment.
And recognition, not just exactly the same thing, but the same thing with a different spin on it, like a different accent mark.
Yeah, well, like I said about it being enjoyment, that's why you can hear a record by a band and it just not even hit you at all. And then you listen to it a week later and you're like, oh, this is pretty good. The reason is because you didn't necessarily pick up on everything that was there, but your brain works like a tape recorder and can remember certain melodies, certain themes. And
I say that that's actually really applicable to a lot of Opeth's later stuff. Like, I didn't really care for Heritage when I first heard it, but then I go back to it again and again, and I found stuff in there that I quite liked.
Yeah. So I guess we'll move on to Still Life because we got a whole bunch of fucking albums to get through.
1999. He has been rendered speechless.
This one's always contender for my number one.
Wow, that's high praise indeed.
It's
what is
I don't know how to say this.
Why do you like it, Dan?
I don't know. I don't want to say this and sound like whatever, but it's fucking flawless.
It is. It's a very tight album. I guess
the vocals are deep on this one. I mean, this is whenever he hit that deep death metal pitch on this record.
It's also, from what I understand, their first concept album as far as an actual theme.
Absolutely, and we'll get into that. That's
Oh, tell me about the theme, Dan. Tell me about the theme.
Well, we'll get to it. I want to talk about the music first. Again, like I said, but this was the same difference, like a difference between albums. This was the same sort of upgrade that we had gotten between Morning Rise and My Arms Your Hearse. This was absolutely heavier. It was absolutely more intense. Obviously, the production quality was significantly improved. And with his change in vocal style, I noticed that his singing was a lot better on this one than it had ever been before. And the songs this time sound absolutely composed. Everything you hear is very intentional. The dynamic shifts on this are amazing. Like they literally can just go from they can literally go from Slayer to Ren Fair in 10 seconds
and make it work and make it kind of blend together and echoes of either in each one.
Yep.
I don't know at what point he started hanging out in his basement for a week with an acoustic guitar and writing an entire Opeth record, and then just walking in saying, all right, guys, this is the album. Let's go record it. But this is a good contender for when that started, because it is composed. It's laid out. One person sees it as a timeline. We're going to start here, and we're going to move up to here and go down to here and come back to here.
Well, and there's a lyrical story being told, but there's also a musical story. It follows itself. And like I'm not so metaphysical, and then I'm like, God, the music just takes me on such a journey. But like,
would you like to be metaphysical, Dan?
It's more like I already listened to The Contortionist. The other thing is that like this is, whenever the story's intense, the music's intense. So I mean, it's not necessarily like, oh my God, it's a musical journey. It's more just like they wrote the music to actually fit the theme of the lyrics, and I think that's something that a lot of bands don't do.
And people have been doing that since opera. So
yeah.
You beat me to it, Mike.
Like in metal. in metal, I mean.
This is the record that we went from a symphony to an opera.
Yeah, I guess it could.
Because an opera is just a symphony with more words.
You know, a lot of opera is about someone who feels he's been wronged by the community and spends about several hours whining about it. So, yeah, sure.
Speaking of the theme of the record. So, he's not off.
We're on fucking point tonight.
He's not wrong. So this song is about a guy who I guess, is kicked out of a community. There's a strong implication that it is a religious community and that he was kicked out of the community for religious reasons. Something to do with him not,
He did not bow to the Christian
not
churches.
being a cool, yeah.
Or whatever, some sort of revisionist idea of what people believe back then actually was.
I'm not sure. Like, it could have been like... It could have been something really dumb. They could have caught him fucking a pig or something. Who really knows?
It was my holy pig fucking religion.
Like
you
most
took
people,
my holy pig fucking god idols and destroyed them.
Like most people that act like fucking victims, we never talk about what he did to get into this.
Oh, no.
To get into this
I'm sure
situation.
he was a misunderstood soul.
I'm sure. Well, anyway, we're on his side. He's us.
Okay.
When we're listening to this.
Oh yeah.
Can I play the Twilight Zone theme
He's
music
in
and just
love
change
with-
it to Black Mirror?
He's in love with this woman named Melinda, who's part of the community. And my understanding is that she, like, after he was kicked out of the community, joined backstory.
some nunnery or something.
Well, backstory. I read all the lyrics for this and wrote notes of what I thought the songs, what the lyrics were.
He took it to that
were
level.
about.
You shame me.
Well, I was listening to it on the vinyl, and it has this really huge gatefold, so I was like able to basically read along with it like a storybook, which was really fun. Yeah, and the Moor is about him, kind of returning to the, basically this outlander that had been exiled from the community walks back into the community and simply states that the only reason he's returned is for this woman named Melinda, who he loves. And apparently she loves him, but I guess after I don't know if it specifies how long ago he was kicked out of the community, but it does seem to indicate that a significant amount of time had passed between his exile and now. So he returns for this woman Melinda, but it's evident that she's already moved on. She married some other person and now is now in that relationship. So
she has a life too, bub.
He's come back for her, essentially.
Oh Lord.
And as time goes on, they kind of like a good death metal opera, but I would actually call this more of a death metal soap opera in the sense that she's like, well, I do love you, but we can't be together, but then we totally can. But no, we can't. But we totally can. I mean, I don't...
Feelings, man.
I don't fucking know.
Nothing more than feelings.
Now, here's what I can't figure out. I don't know if he gets pissed off and kills her, or if a member of the community accidentally killed her, because they're like standing on this bridge and then she dies, and I don't know whether it was him that did it or if it was...
I always assumed, just because, like you said, you do kind of read it from the protagonist's viewpoint. You kind of, first time you read anything, typically you do it that way. I always assumed it was community that kind of killed her because of her association with him.
Right, and I my understanding too is that they must have had some sort of... I don't know if it was necessarily a sexual encounter in this record. Maybe there's a bonus track of that, but it's basically they have some sort of encounter, and everybody realizes that she is on the verge of becoming adulterous if she has not already become adulterous.
Which is a very radical Protestant thing to think.
Absolutely, because if she's thinking about it, she basically did it. But if I'm thinking about killing somebody, that's okay. Anyway,
like radical Protestantism, as in Sweden. So
right.
There's that cultural thing for you.
Man, we need to get Steven back on because he could argue the theology part of it for us really well.
There we go.
But anyway, so she dies. Spoilers. This record came out like a decade ago.
It's an opera. Of course she dies.
She dies. And then he flips the fuck out and starts killing people. But they're a community and he's just one dude, so of course they overpower him. And then he, I believe, is also killed.
He is
at the end
hanged,
of it. At
is
the
he
end of
not?
it. I think he's hung, yeah.
Hang
But I'll tell you what, man,
clutching
that song Serenity Painted Death is absolutely the shining gem on this record. Like, it is...
Speak of the devil, and he shall appear.
It is one of my favorite Opeth songs of all time. And I can pit that song against any of the later stuff. I love it. And my God, was this album not the perfect sign of things to come? Am I right, gentlemen?
No, I think that Still Life does really kind of... Still Life for me is when they really kind of get things together. And there are echoes of Still Life all through the next 5 albums or so. At least up until Heritage.
All right, so we get to talk about this one.
This
Is
little
it time?
guy.
Blackwater Park, 2001.
Oh my
Ooh,
God.
this is where it kind of begins for me, too.
Ladies and gentlemen, what the majority of Opeth fans consider to be the beginning.
It's their master of puppets, right? I mean, it is. Like, you can have your own opinion about what you think your favorite record is, but there's no denying that this was the seminal breakthrough release.
It's just
I am not
perfect.
qualified to argue that I think Still Life is a better album. This is it. This is
album-
the seminal.
It
This is
has-
when the band comes to your town, play Blackwater Park,
They probably got sick
and
of
then they did
sick of that
sometimes.
after a while.
I think now he just tells you to go fuck yourself if
Yeah.
you say something like
And
that.
I don't blame him, but at the same time, this one, there's like one other thing that you really start to get ramped up, I think, on words is you just get the feeling of dissonance, I think, with Blackwater Park. This feeling of something being wrong, but kind of liking it.
This was the first Opeth album that had dynamics within the heaviness.
Yes.
This is the first time where they actually took the heaviness really seriously and could go on and on for several minutes without breaking into their more melodic stuff, because I think sometimes in the past they used their melody as a shield, you know, as a way to either take a break or something. But I mean, this is one of the first records, and we had this a little bit on Still Life as well, but not to as much of a degree. But this record features heavy parts, fast parts. There's actually like dynamic time changes within those heavy parts, and there is kind of a dissonant quality to a lot of the riffs and a lot of the sounds, and it creates this really dark, kind of oppressive atmosphere. And it's an album that looks like what the cover looks like. It sounds like the cover looks, and
Yeah, again with that ghostly, morbid feeling, which is just, it just helps so much. Like, the cover art does set a mood for the music, and it's hard to get over that.
now I do think that the first song is about fucking a dead person.
You think so?
I'm pretty sure. Because isn't Leper Affinity, that's like, your body is mine to avail. What a tragic sight you are. and I think, you know, and I mean, granted, he could just be talking to me. I mean, this could be his pickup line. And I admit that I'm looking kind of tragic, but I don't have anything else going on tonight.
It could be an insult, too. Like, you just call someone just a body, like a tragic body, like, oh, you soulless husk.
Yeah, but he talks about, like there's coffin talk.
Coffin
Coffin talk.
Coffin matters.
Tonight on
yes.
Coffin Talk. Tune in at 7. Yeah.
Great show, great subject. If Mike Yahne ever decides to do a show, Coffin Talk.
Coffin Talk with Mike Ackerfeld. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love
We'll host it.
to help with that.
Presented by discussmetal.com.
Yeah, right. I really like this one, guys. I think it's really good.
You want to do the next 20 minutes on just Blackwater Park?
I don't.
Because you can go right ahead. I know you can.
I don't want to spend the whole podcast on this one album.
But we might have to do a future podcast on just this album.
Maybe that could be one of the Patreon only ones. Devastating vocal delivery.
Oh yes. He has such range with this one, and you definitely get that in Still Life too.
Yeah.
But it's so many
It's not
different
the
animalistic
same.
sounds.
It's just not the same.
It's not. There's a lot of things about Blackwater Park that I find a little difficult to put into words as to just why. Well, this sounds a lot like Still Life in some ways, but in there's like 1,000 tiny little things that add up to something completely different in the end, and it's
kind of like
good, but
it's kind of like Still Life is Star Wars. It's a perfect film, a perfect album. But then Blackwater Park is like Return of the Jedi, which is like The Empire Strikes Back,
Yeah.
which is arguably better than the original perfect creation. You know,
and darker.
it is
somehow.
darker. It ends on a huge down note.
This is the tone of Opeth to me. It's not my favorite record, but if you ask me what does Opeth sound like, I'm going to tell you to listen to Blackwater Park.
I think that's fair.
Because once they did this was the feeling that followed for a long time.
Yeah, Blackwater Park or Deliverance.
Longer
you
than
typically
any
will
other
advise
band
that.
would have got away with it.
You know, let's talk about seasons for a second.
Do you want
I know
some
where you're
spring?
going with
Do you want
this.
some summer? What do you want?
Autumn.
Fall. Demon of the Fall.
Autumn. Fall. October.
The only decent month in Missouri.
I always jokingly refer to Opeth as October because that's the month that I listen to the most Opeth. Because in a certain sense, fall is beautiful. Autumn is beautiful. The leaves changing colors.
Serenity, pain, and death.
Everything's kind of getting ready for winter. Everyone's packing up shop. It's beautiful though. The weather can range from being light and breezy, or a little cold but not too cold, a little warm but not too warm. It's essentially perfect weather for 31 days during the year.
For introspection.
But on the flip side of that, it's also the season of decay.
Yeah.
Everything is dead, dying, rotting, becoming barren.
Yes.
Being deprived of nutrients.
It's so metal.
Mike's going to start dancing back there.
Season that you can have. That besides maybe winter, but that's a whole different thing.
Winter's too obvious, though. Winter's just like, here, I'm winter. I'm here to freeze your ball sack off here.
Right. Well, black metal works really well for winter, but
yeah. Well, black metal is hardly settled.
Yeah. Well, and then November's Doom was just like, well, we'll take this one since Opeth took October,
and they stand alone in the company of none.
Yep.
So, what is Napalm Death?
Napalm Death is we can't talk about Napalm Death yet.
Oh, they're obviously June. I'm just gonna be smug about that and not explain myself.
Well, where do you go from here? Because this is an album that is absolutely as good as the last one, which, I mean, never fucking happens. There's always some way you can say, oh, this one's better than that one, or this one's better than that one. It's not really that way with Blackwater Park. And I don't want to give too much away about it, because if you haven't heard Blackwater Park, you need to
go and listen to it.
You need to buy it
right now
and listen to it.
There's a link down in the
you can
show
find
notes.
it everywhere.
Click it there.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can find it however it is you want to find it. Okay, but the thing is that you need to listen to it in its entirety, in one sitting, with the lyrics or not. I mean, if you read the lyrics, great. If you're Jeff, then you won't. But it's one of those things where it really is something that needs to be experienced. It's kind of not to bring Star Wars into it again, but it is like you meet somebody and you're like, you never seen Star Wars? Well, it's kind of the same thing with Blackwater Park. It's like, oh, you like metal? You've never heard Blackwater Park? God, the melodies on this record are just...
Opeth, more than a lot of bands, tends to reward listening to it from start to finish. I think that even though I often will still pick out an individual song from the earlier lineup, I'm guilty of that. When it comes down to it, I don't feel guilty about that until I reach Ghost Reverie stage. Before then, I feel like I want to listen. If I'm going to listen to one song, I want to listen to the whole thing all the way through. Even if I can't, I have that urge to do so, nonetheless.
I guess it depends on how far away your work is, right? Opeth's not a great car band. Well, if you live less than 10 minutes away from somewhere, you're not even getting one song in.
Yeah.
No, Opeth is, I just got home from work and I've got the whole evening ahead of me.
This bottle of whiskey's not going to drink itself.
Either that, or I'm going to go ahead and just roam through the woods. Or go for a long drive. Now go forth and slay.
Sorry, it's wow.
Into the night.
So after Blackwater Park, we get Deliverance.
Ladies and gentlemen,
2002.
The damned year.
In 2002, there was glory.
There was a
and that
pestilence upon
glory
the land.
Was Deliverance and Damnation. That's right, they released two records. Were they released on the same day? I know they basically were over here.
No, I think they were released apart from each other.
They often feel like
they were like a year apart.
And I blame that on the Lamentations DVD, where they basically, play the whole of Damnation and then
a lot of Deliverance.
A lot of Deliverance with a bit of Blackwater Park thrown in afterwards.
And Demon of the Fall was on that one.
Yeah, and
it's fucking brutal.
If anyone wants to really experience Opeth in a live setting beyond going to one of their shows, definitely pick up the Lamentations DVD. It's incredible. Mike, at one of his finest, he's picking jokes. You get a really good sense of his character. Great guy.
Is
great
Opeth
band.
the only death metal band that gets away with just presenting the music. Because they don't have a look. They're not like evil and gothic.
No, they don't really have a look.
The stage is painted black with these idols erected
Are we back
behind
to
the
Ghost?
band. We're getting there. You know, and they don't look like a metal band. They look like a band that just walks out, puts the instruments on, and presents this extremely heavy and musical experience, and then they leave. And I can't really think of another band that gets away with that I would consider extreme.
They look like a lot of just metal fans, actually. Just, jeans, black t-shirt. Not very unassuming looking. But then the stuff that comes out of them, oh boy, didn't expect that.
They look like 70s like acid rock guys,
I think that's gonna be fair. Yeah.
Which is really on point later on, but
a little drabber, perhaps.
Yeah, a little bit more downtrodden. But Deliverance is like the heaviest thing.
And Damnation is not.
Right. Deliverance is the heaviest thing that they ever released.
It's the most death metal-ish
up to that point,
one.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, Wreath...
Chunk.
The beginning of Wreath is like the most death metal thing they've ever done. And so...
Enunciated death metal vocals. He's always been very good at enunciating. I find Mike's vocals to be way easier to understand than a lot of other artists.
Very easy to understand,
but
yeah.
this is even more. It's punctuated almost on some of these songs on this album.
One of my favorite songs on this record is A Fair Judgment. There's a really great melodic, really great melodic section, and I really wish I could give you the timestamp on that, Joe, but I can't because I don't pay that much attention. But it starts off really dark sounding, and it's weird that that's my favorite song because it's not very death metal-y, and it actually sounds more like it should have been on Damnation. I don't know if they made a mistake or...
So explain the dichotomy of Deliverance and Damnation, because a lot of people are thinking, okay, so they put out 2 albums in a very close time frame. Okay, great. It was basically a double album. System of a Down did that too. They just took one album and split it in half and released it 8 months apart. Yeah, that's not exactly what Opeth did. They kind of did a yin and yang thing where this album is supposed to be extremely heavy and dark and distorted, and then over here you have this very light sounding, very progressive rock, very 70s, very Pink Floyd.
Deliverance was, in my opinion, kind of like a normal Opeth album. It was extremely heavy, like it was definitely heavier than anything else that they had ever released, but it's not all that. It still has Opeth's melodic touch to it. It still has its flourishes. It still sounds like October, and it's a really complete package on its own. Damnation, on the other hand, is like if you took all of the soft parts, quote unquote, from an Opeth album and made that into a record. That's a really, I know that's a really simplistic way of putting it, but that is essentially what we have here. They've stripped the heavy elements down, and they're basically giving us what's left, but they're taking something that may have only been a minute or 2 minutes and fleshing out that idea and making that into an actual song.
I think that there is a lot of thought put behind Damnation. It flows together very well. It's got this just heartbreakingly kind of just bittersweet quality to it.
It's depressing.
It is depressing, especially towards the end.
Yeah.
It feels almost like someone's getting over, like, some sort of horrific disease that has left them maimed in a way, and it's told from their perspective.
It's totally about just Frodo, after he lost the ring.
The DTs from the ring.
Right, yeah.
I wonder, was it all sunshine in Elfinland? No.
No, it wasn't. Now listen to Damnation. Oh, man. Yeah, like this is really a great Opeth record because as we get on in this discography, there's going to be a lot of discussion about how if a band abandons its heaviness, does that make it a bad band? And I would say this is a really early example of no. This just shows that they're very diverse as musicians.
Right.
And they can pull something like this off and get away with it. However, had the next 2 albums sounded like this, I do kind of wonder what the reaction would have been.
Well, here's also a thing that I guess we'll get into as more as we go into it deeper, a lot of Opeth fans are completely unpleasable.
Totally.
Like historically, down to each record. And what's even bizarre is I'm even seeing some reactions online between even some of the new records. You know, people that were fine up until Heritage, fine with Pale Communion, but fuck Sorceress. And it's just like, I don't know where the mentality comes from.
They can only be so lucky to fuck a Sorceress.
I don't know. Well, yeah, unfortunate.
Yeah.
But no, I don't really understand where that mentality comes from over all this time. Because I can get when people started to, dislike Heritage and they didn't buy into it. Of course, I never have gotten was why they've been so vicious overall. So my band has put out 8 great albums that I loved, and now they put out something that I don't like. Well, I'll still have those 8.
Well, I think it's the meathead mentality, which is kind of weird though, because I
don't know if I would say it's
Opeth's not a
meathead
meathead band.
I don't think they're meatheads. I just think it's some sort of weird form of pretension. Or they're just into something about Opeth that's so freaking specific that if the next album doesn't have it, then that's when they decide to part ways.
Well, see, I don't think it's
weird.
that. I disagree a little bit, because I think what it really is that it is pretension, but I think at the end of the day, it's really just about the vocals for some people.
Yeah.
And whenever you don't have that death metal growl, that deep growl, and don't get me wrong, it sounds cool, and there's times I'm disappointed that it's not there. But at the same time, you can't put something where it doesn't fit. If you do, you go to jail. So it's one of those things where you can't just outright say I don't like it because he doesn't death growl anymore.
You can't say that about Opeth at all.
That would sound stupid.
So you have to create some lofty reason as to why.
I would take that reason, he doesn't death growl anymore, actually is much more legitimate than making up all sorts of ideas.
It's more honest.
Yeah, because that's no more death growl. Death growl can be a make or break thing if you're really into certain forms of metal and you get that, you get your jollies from that. I can relate to that. At the same time, I also am into so many different forms of music that I don't really care if my favorite bands decide to switch up the genres from time to time. So it's not an issue for me.
And this is what I would argue about Opeth. Give me one record that's all heavy. I don't think it exists.
Yeah, they don't.
So what are you complaining about?
That's the thing too. People that whinged on and on about some of their recent transformations, but here's the thing though, it's not even the recent stuff. Every album they've done, seemingly, at least from where I can see, from Ghost Reveries onwards, people bitched about it. And it never stops. So of course they still buy the album though.
Is the reason still because it's not Blackwater Park? Because that used to be the reason.
Man, I hope that's not the reason, but it could be.
I think so. I think so. For some people, I think a lot of people, Blackwater Park was the first record they heard from the band, and a first impression is hard to break. And I want to say it's their Black album. It's not necessarily like that in that they didn't really change like Metallica did. But at the same time, this was everybody's introduction. This was holy shit, this band, they're from Sweden and they're great. They play really complicated stuff. And the guy growls, which I think is really cool. And, I think that people are just afraid to hear things that they don't know very well. There's this theme of repetition is appreciation.
I don't know though, because each album is so different from each other, and then why would you choose? I don't know. I just don't get the mentality, I guess.
Why would you choose Blackwater Park over everything else?
Well, yeah, especially if you have no problem with Deliverance, if you have no problem even with Damnation, that's the major thing, and then all of a sudden just decide to get pissed off of Ghost Reveries, that's bizarre to me.
Well,
but that's a big thing.
It is. Well, it's weird because they pretty much got a collective pass on Damnation.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because Deliverance balanced it out and it was just a wash or what. But I don't remember hearing all the shit talk about Damnation. And like I said, that was the first record I ever heard. And even though I was like, wait, this isn't death metal, I didn't hate it or reject it. I was just like, okay, this is different. And then, of course, a very quick internet search reassured me that, no, this is not what the band always sounds like. They were on a smaller label for pretty much everything from Still Life until the end of Damnation, really. And then they signed a new record label. They signed with a major. Well, Roadrunner Records is still technically an independent record label, but they're the record label that spawned Nickelback, so it's a major.
Never
label.
live it down.
As far as I'm concerned, it's a major
Never
label.
live it down.
If I was in a band and I could sign to Roadrunner Records, I would consider it a major label. Opeth announces that they have signed with Roadrunner Records in the U.S., and I think they run. Was it? I think it was Nuclear Blast in Europe.
Yeah, for a while there.
I could be wrong about that, but
Was
I think
it Century Media?
Could have been Century Media. I think it was
either
Century
way,
Media.
They switched to Roadrunner, and I know that generated a whole lot of salt. But we're not going to talk about these.
Well, we're not going to get into it too much, but I do want to highlight that there was backlash, big time, when they announced that when they were going to Roadrunner, because everybody's like, oh god, they're going to sound like Slipknot now. Or they're going to sound
there are people
like...
that listen to it and then kept on saying, but we're not concerned ourselves with these people.
I remember because
playing and it's
on the
DVD,
on the DVD, Mike Ackerfeld actually says, he's like, and then there's the people that are pissed off because we signed a Roadrunner, but those people are idiots.
Yes, straight up. Oh wow, your band is more successful. It's on a better label. Better because it can get you more of what you want, maybe.
Yeah, well, the more albums you sell, the more my appreciation for your band wanes. Ugh. It's like, come on. How
dare the things I love be successful and make a living outside of the 7-Eleven? Damn it!
I don't think me and Mike could have been more ribbed out for the release of this record.
I was hyped. Like this is right after Dan had introduced me to Opeth in general. I was still coming off the high that was Deliverance, and it was and for this to just come blasting at you with all of this occult flat say satanic imagery. This
is the first time for that.
Oh, it was good. It felt good though because it wasn't like over the top. And what's interesting, as a young Christian lad, it didn't really go too far over because it was so esoteric. There was lots of references to the Faustian bargain. The Grand Conjuration is basically it feels like nothing but that. And you could always say we could always write it off in a different way. It doesn't really come off as particularly. A lot of the lyrics, to my mind, don't come off as a major endorsement of occult practices, especially the left-hand path, because, I mean, just listen to Bang of the Hounds. He's not describing this master in a particularly flattering way, his body being a country, cities lie desolate, it goes on. But, it was a gateway, and it felt good to pass through those doors in a way.
I just want to make a special announcement that Discography Discussion as a podcast 100% supports the Entombed album, Left Hand Path.
Yes. That was an Entombed album?
Yeah, I just need to get that off my chest.
I guess I can't argue because it's official now.
If you remember, Joe, I think it was my very first album of the week.
We have different schools of thought here. It's good. That's what makes what makes the world go round, gentlemen.
It does.
Yes. Hail Satan.
Oh shit. Okay. Well, anyway, we have an album that I think, dare I say, it's heavier than Deliverance.
Ooh, I don't know about that.
It's definitely more well produced.
It's funkier, and that combined with the brutal elements might kind of accentuate that, make it sound heavy in some places.
Dude, the Bang of the Hounds when it starts it's terror.
It is.
Not the hardcore band Terror, but it's terror. Like terror embodied in music. It is.
Well, they're coming for you, man.
It is genuinely frightening. Or even like the beginning of Ghost of Perdition. I mean, you're just chilling.
Even him calling the hounds flocks doesn't take away from the terror.
It scared me to death the first time I heard Ghost of Perdition because it was like, I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, it's a new Opeth album. It's going to be proggy. It's going to be this, it's going to be that. And it's like, and then suddenly just, Ghost of Perdition. You're like, oh my God.
Devil cracked the earthly shell. It's like, oh, okay, hello.
But that was equally scary. Where did this, because up to this point, Michael Ackerfeld always sang in a more subdued, a more subdued way. He didn't sing like rock songs, like a rock vocalist.
For me,
this record, he throws all that out the window.
Like the lyrics are much more cohesive. Like there's stories being told here. Whenever I like Opeth, I like the writing style from before, but you have to really read a lot into it.
This is the logical next step.
Yeah. This is direct. He's singing about losing your soul practically. He's singing about ennui, about the personal journey. Most of it pretty dark. But I get that, and you can easily get that. You don't have to read anything into Ghost Reveries very much. It's very straightforward. It's out there for you.
This is the record where they stopped composing symphonies, and this is where we started composing very dark Broadway plays.
That's a good analogy. I like that.
The imagery is right out in front of you, and the host is speaking directly to your face, and you feel every word he says. I would like, if I may, to tell you about the banging of the hounds.
I shall tell you a story of skullduggery and things that go boom in the night. Yes.
Okay, Bela. I think you guys are overcomplicating this shit.
We're having fun. This album is fun.
It is.
That's what I like.
Well, that's what I was talking about with the rock vocals, like the devil cracked the earthly shell for told you was the one. You like that?
Yes.
That was really different for me to hear, and I don't hate it. I'm just describing it like it. It was different in the sense that like you're used to. We're in kind of by the time we got to Deliverance, we were in kind of an Opeth safe zone because all the way up from Still Life, you had a pretty comparable experience.
Yes.
From there, whereas Ghost Reveries throws a lot of that out the window, and they fuck with the formula a lot on this record. And I like it in that it kind of comes across as like this evil rock record.
I think that they're a bit closer than we think, though. To like there are echoes of Still Life even in this.
Well, yeah.
And there's a lot of.
But isn't it interesting that Still Life has become an echo at this point, and it's only been a few records?
Yeah. Well, they're moving on, man. That's one thing you can say about Opeth is they like to move on.
I don't think that this record sounds as medieval, though. Not to say it like that. I mean, they've dropped that somewhere in the middle of Still Life.
Not folksy wolksy. It's much more like the softer parts, the more melodic parts are definitely more 70s rock.
It's like I kind of always envisioned this as kind of a horror film like soundtrack. It's more like that for me than a Broadway play, and I imagine it's something that takes place in the either in the modern day or is something that takes place in like the 90s. I just get weird visions of like I don't know, like Johnny Depp in a dark basement and there's like candles and demons are chasing him through the streets and stuff.
I don't know if it's because of all the Faustian references and the Grand Conjuration, but I just got overwhelming visions of like some 16th or 17th century necromancer trying to find the Philosopher's Stone, tears running down his eyes as he's realizing he's screwed up some part of the ritual, and then a vast demon overtaking him.
Damn.
But that's just that's just me.
That's creative. I'm into it though. That's cool.
I mean, a lot of that stuff is stripped straight out. I read a lot.
Sure. I get
put it that way.
I just listen to metal albums and talk. That's like literally all I do.
That's okay, man. I still love you.
Yeah, all right. Well, this record was safe, but it was less safe than like Deliverance was. This is. Because again, I don't think this doesn't sound like Blackwater Park to me. It doesn't sound like Deliverance, and that's okay. I think this was a really welcome change, and the band was still scary. They were still evil, and it really. This was literally the best record they could have released after all the speculation on their label choice.
It was very nice, and I think that. You talk about echo points, that we're still in the phase where we're dealing with the echoes of Ghost Reveries with everything that's come since. Because little snippets of that just keep on popping up all the way through Heritage.
Oh yeah,
and I haven't really absorbed Pale Communion or Sorceress like I should have, but we're already to Watershed, aren't we?
Watershed. Joe, pull up the definition of a watershed. It's not.
We got two different terms.
It's not like
more than one meaning to this.
You're thinking of the water closet, Michael.
It's not like there's a hole in the roof of my shed. That's not what I'm going for here. But a watershed is essentially the beginning of a river.
An area or ridge of land that separates waters flowing to different rivers, basins, or seas. Synonym of divide.
So that's interesting, right?
Well, does it not also mean just a watershed, like we say, a watershed in politics or a watershed in history, to where it's a complete change or break from the past.
An event or period making a turning point in a course of action or state of affairs. That is literally the greatest definition of what this album is. This has tons of ghost reveries in it. It's all over the place. I would almost even say some unused ideas. And I mean, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but this had a lot of really melodic, clean songs. Still very dark, still very scary, but like they focused a lot more on the melody.
Right, like that ghostliness, though.
Ghostliness,
that which began with Still Life and Blackwater, especially with Blackwater Park, I think is in this album in spades.
Yeah.
This ethereal feeling of being in some places not quite right. It's just this feeling of unease, this dissonance, and I love it.
Well, I think that this record, though, you've got like, 2 death metal songs on this? Maybe 3? And that's interesting to me
parts
because...
of them, at least.
Yeah, well, that's interesting to me, though, because... I think the whole watershed part of it, I think this was like a warning. Like, hey, guys, we're about to change shit up again on you.
Yeah.
But here's this album. You're going to be fine with this. But I just want you to know that it's going to change. Yeah, dude, I remember people calling it like water shit when it came out. And like...
Again, unpleasable fan base.
Totally, because they're still doing very Opeth-y stuff on this record.
Yeah.
The Lotus Eater is one of the most insane songs I've ever heard by them. One of the heaviest, too. Like, I mean, really, like, and don't get me wrong, it gets fucking weird about halfway through and goes off in a totally different direction.
Opeth has always been weird, though, ever since Blackwater Park. They've always had weirdness in them.
I'm not criticizing it. I'm just making a statement. Like, it gets weird. It gets a little bit... It goes into areas that you aren't going to expect, but I do feel in my heart that this record was there to get us used to the idea of having a non-death metal Opeth. The death metal stuff that we got on this record was kind of like a here you go, but this is it.
You think that this is the last bone that was thrown to those people that are like, if it doesn't have death growls, I'm out?
Pretty much.
I don't know if they consciously meant it to be that way. To me, it seems like it's always been a gradual evolution. Like, there's been things that have come as a surprise at the moment, but then you go back and you listen album after album after album, you can definitely see a progression there.
A little bit. I'm going to disagree on that, but we'll get to why later.
You're entitled to your disagreements.
Well, there's the door.
That's Joe's studio. Joe, which one do you love best?
I don't know which one's the evil one.
Watershed is a fantastic record. I love the way it begins. I love the way it ends. I love everything in the middle. It's like a great sandwich.
Goopy sandwich.
Do you want some mayo on that sandwich, Dan?
Well, there's mayo, mustard,
ectoplasm,
random goat fat.
Oh man, I love
definitely a lot of goat fat.
Salty goat fat.
Absolutely. And I don't have a lot to say about this one though, because this record, for whatever reason, I love it, but it did not connect with me the way the other ones did. So I listened to this one probably the least out of the older Opeth material, because it's good, but it doesn't. I didn't listen to it like 150, 170 times like I did the other ones. That's not to say that there's anything wrong with it, but I kind of saw, like, being one of those guys that's very concerned with vocals, I kind of saw the writing on the wall with this one.
You beat me to it, because this is where I kind of got worried. I wanted to like this. I feel like I spent a lot of time trying to convince myself that I really liked Watershed, but I don't love it as much as I love Ghost Reveries, Deliverance, Damnation.
That's understandable. You get one of my issues with the Watershed, I guess, would have to be how some of the lyrics just seem overly simplistic. Fields of Sorrow, we get it. You're running through them. You don't have to keep on repeating it. This is that's such a dick thing for me to say, but I don't know. It just feels like there could have been more said. I don't know.
This is like, bad example, but this is like you giving me a copy of The Watchmen.
Yeah.
And then I read it and I like it, and then you give me the movie, and now I have to spend the next 7 or 8 viewings trying to convince myself that the movie is good compared to the book. Because it's not that great of a movie.
Yeah.
In fact, in that instance, I would say it's absolutely horrible. But there are aspects of Watershed that sound like we were trying to write an Opeth record. This may have been the bottom of the death metal barrel. This may have been some frustration. Like, we just gave them Ghost Reveries, and they're still talking about Blackwater Park. I honestly don't know.
I don't think that the fans influence Opeth as much as they like to think they do.
I don't think they influence Opeth at all.
Yeah,
I think Opeth is a very integrity-laden band that doesn't care what the fan wants.
If Mike gave a shit as far as the naysayers go, then he wouldn't have moved past Still Life, probably. He wouldn't have moved past Morning Rise.
There's better Opeth.
Oh yeah, there is. But the reasons I like Watershed have really nothing to do with the lyrics, or the song structure, or what have you. It all comes down to this feeling of weirdness and dissonance, which is gimmicky. It's all about the novelty for me when it comes to this album. If I'm in a quirky mood, if I'm in a mischievous mood, this is the Opeth I'll reach for. If I'm in a more serious mood, obviously I'm going to take up Blackwater Park or Damnation or Deliverance.
Right, and the main reason to put in Watershed is just so you can surprise somebody.
Yeah.
Just with the opening of Heir Apparent. Just, oh, that's dissonant and heavy. Oh, they hit me again in the face.
Yeah, the dissonance has really ratcheted up the feeling of just the wrong key being played in the right way. It's nice, though. I like it.
I remember the first time me and Joe heard this one. They had like a 5.1 surround sound version. It came with a DVD, and that's the first time we listened to that on Joe's speakers. And it was definitely really impressive then. But I think that was also the same day that I picked up Danza 3.
Oh, shit.
And as we described that album, that album is really hard to get through. It's like pushing a boulder up a hill. And so whenever we heard this was just like total like crack to our ears. But yeah, after repeated listens, it was just like, I like this basically, but I'm not feeling it like I felt the older stuff. And that's a very, metalhead elitist thing to say, but it's kind of true. And so I would say whenever we went into Heritage, I really didn't know what to expect because I didn't know what direction that river was going to go in.
Speaking of which, Heritage, very, very both unexpected and in some ways not so unexpected direction. Because, if you really followed Opeth, if you listened to Mike Yahne talk about his influences and the other bandmates talk about theirs, then you can definitely see that they had been wanting to return to stuff like, not so much a return, obviously, wanted to kind of merge into this kind of stuff.
They wanted to sound like the bands that influenced them. The problem is whenever Opeth first came out, they were in that Swedish melodic death metal scene. And that's just the way bands sounded in the early to mid 90s in Sweden. The death metal vocals had to be there. The kind of folk influenced stuff had to be there. Because you can hear that kind of shit all over early Dark Tranquillity. You can hear all that shit. I actually recently picked up a record by a band called God Macabre, and it was from 1994. It was a Swedish death metal record, and it definitely is a little bit more brutal, but it has a pretty similar quality to what Opeth was doing on Orchid. And so I think what we had with Opeth was a band that started in that scene, felt like they kind of had to be that way for a while, but I think after doing the death metal thing for essentially a whole career, we're going from like 1990,
early 90s,
5 to 2005.
Well, they were around a little before they released Orchid.
Are we the same people that we were 10 years ago?
No,
not even close. So Neither is Michael Ackerfeld. And it's one of those, like, you realize when you're young and you're in a band and you're part of a scene, you tend to kind of do what the scene does. However, we were all inspired uniquely to like certain types of music, and we discovered a lot of that on our own. It wasn't that we were part of a scene or that we were part of some kind of movement. I think he was caught up in that at the beginning and carried it through because, 8 or 9 years later, it's like, well, this is what I'm famous for doing now, so I have to do it. But I think Heritage was kind of a middle finger to that and said, no, I like bluesy, jazzy, funky 70s rock. Yeah. Music that's unpredictable and creates, unique soundscapes. That's the kind of shit that gets him hard. That's the stuff that
all the more power to him.
That's the stuff that he loves.
Like, personally, it took me a long time to get into Heritage. I never disliked the album, but it's just whenever I wanted to feel in an Opeth mood, I would jump to some other album, usually a heavier one. But for me, that would be the same thing, because I'm not always in the mood to listen to Damnation either. It'd be a very specific Opeth mood to listen to either album, but when I do, I typically enjoy them.
Well, and I think it was just one of those, I'm going to cut the bullshit now because I've put out, 9 albums
yeah.
already? And I think that the band had reached a level of success at that point where he kind of felt like, you know what? I'm going to start doing what I want now. I've earned that.
Yeah.
And so we ended up with an album like Heritage, which is much more progressive rock. Again, though, like Mike said, though, there's a lot of Ghost Reveries in here if you're looking for it. If you're the kind of person that just listens all the way through waiting for the death vocals to kick in and then they never come,
you'll be disappointed.
I can understand that disappointment a little bit. I think that may have been my first listen was with that expectation. I didn't know.
I think it all comes down to that ghostly feel, that just feeling of a time and place that is very unique. Opeth, for me, has been always very difficult to describe, just the way they sound. And like I said, I have to describe it using allusions to literature or artwork. It's difficult for me to compare them to other bands even.
Well, and I don't think that The Devil's Orchard was a really good one to release as a single, because I don't think that represents the album totally.
Yeah, I mean,
I question whether or not Opeth actually has a single.
Right, I was about to say that.
Well, this
too.
was released. This was released as a single. By a single, I mean they sent it to the metal radio stations, and it was the big Opeth song that you could hear on Facebook or MySpace or whatever the hell. You could hear that before the album came out. That's what I mean by a single. It was our first taste of Heritage. But I hear a lot of Watershed on this one. I hear a lot of Ghost Reveries. Like really, really good keyboard work on this. It wasn't until I think Deliverance really that we got keyboards on an Opeth record, and they've always they didn't really flare up until we got to Ghost Reveries, and then the keyboards became a much more prominent instrument, because before that, all the melody, everything was all guitar driven. So the reliance on keys added, like what Mike was saying, that ghostly feel, that otherworldly feel, and that's all over this record. There's really creepy moments that are really heavily accentuated by the keyboard.
Oh yeah, the keyboard's a good accentuator. I think keyboard or not, as they've always said, that feel, and you still get that same feeling with these more these. I don't want to say. I'll go ahead and say it's softer albums. You're still getting Opeth. You're still getting something that's definitely recognizably Opeth, which to me, I think. As long as as a band is itself and recognizable, that's reasonable.
I think they still sound like Opeth here.
Yeah.
This is a different kind of heavy. This is a heavy that the majority of metal fans don't want to embrace because it's not extreme and brutal and loud, but it's 70s heavy. It's the tone of what the music is about is what makes it heavy, not the sound of the song that you're listening to.
Well, there's some heavy riffs.
So you're talking more like less heavy, like chunk heavy, and more like, oh man, that's some heavy stuff.
Yeah, but they've never been a chunk heavy band anyway. And that's the thing that I don't understand is like there was all these cries of sellout when this record came out. Because there's a lot of people that were like, album, fucking knew it. I knew it. I knew that he was going to drop those death metal vocals. And I don't appreciate that, and I'm not about that. And what is this, like weird 70s rock and shit? And it's like, dude, have you heard the other albums? Like, I mean,
it's at least 50% of every album.
Weird 70s rock does make
the course. Yeah,
weird 70s rock is definitely part of Opeth's their map.
It's in their DNA. It's in their DNA. Absolutely. Yeah. Like they've always been that way. So I don't think anybody really has a leg to stand on because really the sellout thing to do at this point in their career.
Go ahead and tell me about selling out, Dan, all over again.
Is to put out a...
Morning Rise again.
Put out, yeah. Go back and put out another Blackwater Park. Put out another Still Life. You know, like, make it about the ghosts that...
Black Rose Immortaler.
Right, so it's like, that is more of a sellout move than what they did. What they did may not have necessarily been the smartest thing to do financially. But I have a lot of appreciation for somebody saying, you know what, I'm a musician, and this is what I do to express myself, and this is what I want to do.
I don't think they're hurting financially.
I don't think so either. Because I think one of the biggest complaints people used to have about Opeth on the other side of the spectrum, the people that weren't metalheads, couldn't get past the growled vocal.
Yeah.
It was one of those like, wow, this album, Blackwater Park, has amazing instrumentals. But when that death growl kicks in, it's like my brain just turns off.
Yeah,
I've heard that tons of times.
These people will be coming back now that these albums are here, and there are plenty of us who will listen to Opeth just fine, no matter what they decide to do, as long as they just keep on doing quality work, which I don't really see them not doing that. So
yeah, so Pale Communion, this one actually, like, Heritage was a little bit of a miss for me. But Pale Communion is when things started to get a little weird.
I think that Pale Communion is much more in your face as far as like these are our influences and this is what. That sounds like Rush there for a second.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah.
So
there's Rush in here. There's Yes in here.
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
There's always Camel in there. You know.
Oh, always Camel. It wasn't that one of the major influences supposedly.
Yeah. Hey Dan, do you want to hear some Blue Oyster Cult, Dan?
Sure.
Wait about 20 seconds.
Yeah.
I was being figurative, not literal.
It's funny.
I'm at a disadvantage here because I only started listening to the last two albums, this and Sorceress, for the past couple of weeks, and I've only listened to them both, about once a piece, so didn't absorb it quite so well.
I almost hear a little bit of like Meatloaf in this in places. It's weird, like, and I'm not like a big classic rock guy, so like some of this stuff I have to admit went a little over my head. But I found this album pretty enjoyable. It's not my go-to by any means because it was just so musically weird. And as we've discussed, I don't always like things that are different. I struggle a lot with being that elitist metalhead asshole. And I think that I can appreciate what they were going for on this.
Something just feels wrong to you?
It feels off.
I think the more you listen to something, you'll at least that feeling of alienness will kind of go away. You might still hate it. Not to say that you hate it necessarily.
Every Opeth record borrows from the previous record. So Watershed borrowed from Ghost Reveries, Heritage borrowed from Watershed, and now this record is borrowing from Heritage, but it's kind of borrowing the elements that I don't enjoy as much. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'll get a few more listens and I'll be able to really pick up on it, I suppose. But no, I liked it the first go through. I remember my first impression was like, is this Rush for just a second?
Yeah.
And then, oh wait, no, this is Opeth that I'm listening to. Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's still got that darkness to it.
Yeah, the melodies are there. The quintessential kind of Opeth gloom and ghostliness is there. It's a little more upbeat in places, though. It's definitely got some weird kind of almost jam band quality. I don't know if I want to say that, but I just did, so we're going to run with it. But
well, let's cut this shit. It's a little wanky. It's a very, looky what we can do.
Like you think
experimenting with odd time signatures.
They're playing in the forest.
Yeah, but it doesn't connect with me on an emotional level like the previous records did.
That same forest where before they were sodomizing a dead girl's corpse, now they're just kind of like Morris dancing in that same clearing, man. They're just kind of having a good time. They brought some beers and some frankfurters.
That wasn't Opeth.
Oh, okay.
I don't think.
Well, you tried to read into that.
Well, the jury's still out on the Leper Affinity.
I was going to say, I'm referencing that, obviously, but,
I think this was, they sat down and were listening to Aqualung and Inagata Davida on shuffle and said, all right, guys, let's just do that.
Yeah.
And
it almost sounds like a jam band.
Yes, it does. And obviously the answer is this is the record they wanted to make because they made it. If you wanted to look at it from a purely financial perspective, this could be that percentage of their fans that filled out the survey and said, yeah, we like that progressive stuff you do, but it's less than 20% of the overall fan base. Okay, well, let's do a really kind of 70s jam thing. But honestly, it's not bad. I don't dislike it. I like it more than I like Heritage, but this isn't why I listen to Opeth. I question whether or not this should have been called something else other than Opeth, and it was just called Opeth because this is the record the band made.
The Mike Ackerfeld experience.
I didn't want to say it because I had the same actual feeling about Heritage when I first listened to it. I had the feeling, is this the least Opethy of all the Opeth records? And I'll be honest, because I've had that feeling before about another one, and it was wrong. I don't really want to go back. I don't really want to say it about this one. I mean, just from listening to it right this second, I can tell there's so much else that is different from Opeth's whole history and has much more in common with, like you said, Jethro Tull, all of this, so much else from the 70s and early 80s and what have you. But I'm willing to give it a few more shots before I make my judgment, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not going to say it's bad. I don't think that Opeth has put out a bad record. Spoilers for the next one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that the big thing also is just seeing so much irrational hate directed at Opeth has kind of made me a little protective towards them in some instances, to where if they try something new, I'll be like, well, let's see what happens, you know?
And they don't sound like they're imitating another band. It's not like they woke up and said, yeah, we're going to do progressive rock, and then it just sounded like an imitation of those bands. It sounds like Opeth just recorded a different type of album. Yeah. It still sounds like Opeth. And that's something that they should be praised for, because a lot of other bands that try things...
or change their whole genre, for one thing, which is arguably what they've done here. This is... I mean, the same person who's like just a metalhead and likes metal... I mean, you're obviously not going to stick around from this. But if you're into multiple different kinds of genres already, then this is not going to hurt your feelings as much.
No, this is Opeth that I listen to on a Saturday morning while I cook breakfast.
Yeah, I can see that.
Creepy.
You can see that Joe just, frying up the bacon sizzling.
Goat fat bacon.
Fat bacon. Oh, God, so much goat fat.
Soaked in goat fat. So
salty.
Talking to myself in the voice of Papa Emerita's 7.
Oh, yeah.
So, Sorceress...
Oh, you're just going to go straight into it then, aren't you?
Yeah, Sorceress...
Moving right along.
Sorceress follows a lot of the same pattern as Pale Communion, and again, it borrows heavily from that record. I don't have a lot to say about it as much as it's just kind of a wank fest. It is. There's a lot of looky what we can do. It is. I mean, like, it's got these weird tempos.
I feel obligated to argue against you, but I can't do that from a position of knowledge, so I won't.
Well, I'm just making statements here. I'm not saying that it's bad. But what I am saying is that we're completely off the map now.
Remember earlier when I said that they were making Broadway plays? Yeah, this is the film version of a Broadway play.
Oh, that's harsh.
I don't think this is that bad.
That's mean, Joe.
From a tone perspective, this is we took, before we were doing Repo on stage. Now we're doing Repo on film.
I still liked Repo on film.
Well, Repo was only on film. Bad example.
wait.
Let me try that
You're
again.
confusing me.
Michael's like, you did this just to screw with
for
me.
a second, I was like, oh my God, there's a Repo on ice. Repo on ice.
No, it's not what I'm saying.
Opeth does the soundtrack.
What I'm saying is that there's too much tonal shift on this record. I love a dynamic record. I like a record that goes to a lot of different places. I don't like going that many different places in 6 minutes, I guess is where I'm at. It's the same thing I level against Between the Buried and Me's newer albums, is the fact that it's very tonally, like the 30 seconds into a song, it's much more tonally different than the previous 30 seconds. It changes around so much. It does so much weird shit. And I have a lot of trouble keeping up with it. And I'm sure there's some kind of like really great genius behind all of it that I don't get, because we've only gotten genius from Opeth for the most part, with maybe the exception of the first couple albums. But for the most part, there's always a reason for why they do these weird things. And I get it, but I'm just not into the style of music that they're playing, because I am, at the end of the day, a metalhead.
Yeah. And there's
so
no problem with
when
that.
we've gone off this far off the map 4 times now.
Yeah.
Damnation is a little different in the sense that it still sounded like the Blackwater Park Deliverance era Opeth, just not screaming.
Yeah, totally, it was basically there.
Right, but Damnation has arguably almost the same tone throughout.
It does, yeah.
Whereas this record is just like, okay, we're going to do an aggressive, like, almost like piano chord chunk. Like, they try to chunk with the piano, and like, there's weird, wanky, like, 70s rock guitar solos in there. And it sounds like the guitars they're playing were manufactured in 1978. And, like, this
is sounding eerily familiar to your Ghost explanation.
Let me put it this way. This is way better than Ghost. Let me put it this way. This is really great.
But not for you.
I'm just not into it.
This is not why you listen to Opeth.
We could really boil it all down to that.
And but I'm not bitching at the band, or I'm not like, again, Rob Rivera said a few episodes back from Nonpoint, he said, I don't understand why all these people like hear something different than what they like and feel personally betrayed by it.
Well, you're mature enough to know that you already have some incredible Opeth albums that you'll always be able to return to, and just like any other great work, you'll always find something new and fresh within that which is old and familiar.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Mike.
I'm looking out for you.
However, that level of maturity has not always been on display. Reference In Flames.
Well,
but I want to talk about that for a second.
Flames, so I wasn't there for that.
I want to talk about that for a second. Okay. What In Flames did, In Flames was great. Came out of the same scene as Opeth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What they did is they put out brilliant albums. And then they changed. But the problem is like, what In Flames was doing on their later records wasn't like what Opeth did with Heritage and Pale Convenient and all that.
Not even comparable.
Because what In Flames did is what they did was an obvious listening to other people and trying to say, okay, well,
we want to sound more like American new metal.
What do you think?
Want to sound,
yeah, what do you think this is going to sound like? Like
Linkin Park
how
sings
many
about their
records
feelings.
do we think we're going to sell?
Let's sing about our feelings now,
right?
And we're going to go from, because it's very abrupt to go from space gods and ancient races retaking what is rightfully theirs after they ascend to the sun, and then switching over to, I'm 30 now. I'm so sad inside.
Right, and we've already had that rant.
I know. But Jeff could probably put it far better than I could, because he seems to be even more have a more personal skin in the game than I do as far as that goes. But
but I guess the point I'm trying to make is that like In Flames became almost a parody of themselves, whereas Opeth did the change tastefully.
Yeah.
in the sense that this is one of those. This is just the kind of music I want to make, guys.
Yeah, it's
I really
because-
hope that you guys enjoy it, but I understand if you don't.
No matter how like weird they get in their fans' eyes, they're always going to be able to say, well, at least they're doing it because they want to do it. This is something they want to try, and I think that's remarkable.
As James
to see.
Hetfield once said, it's all about having fun and trying something new.
Yeah.
So is this the record that they wanted to make when they made Watershed? Like, they did Ghost Reveries, and it was really heavy and really upfront and really progressive.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said, we should try doing this. Like, we have fun playing this kind of progressive rock thing. And they said, well, if we're going to do that, we need to make a logical transition out of it. So we're only going to be able to do that in about 5 years after we put out 2 intermediate albums to kind of get the fans warmed up to the idea.
I think so. I think that could be it. I don't know if it was like that.
If that's the case,
Planned.
he's the smartest decision any band has ever made.
I don't think it was that planned out. But I do think that, like,
I have a feeling that the secret would be if we listened to more or read more interviews with the guys, or maybe, hey, if there's a way to contact them, ask them what they think.
well, that might happen at some point. But for the time being, all we can really do is speculate. And I think I got mad respect for the dude for doing what he wants. And if Jeff were here, he probably would have brought up Catatonia by now. And
He did recommend Catatonia very enthusiastically to me when he found out I was into Opeth. So.
Yeah, I think, and he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Jeff would say that, Catatonia handled the whole transition from being a death metal band very similar to Opeth, right down to Michael Ackerfeld actually doing vocals on their albums.
That's something.
Isn't that crazy? They called him in just to do the scream vocals. That's hilarious to me. But
he does have a quality. His voice is incredible. It can register those incredible metal sounds and then incredible clean vocals.
Have you heard Bloodbath?
You know what? Is that his side project? That was
Well,
more
it's
recent?
not his side project. It's more like a death metal supergroup.
Yeah, I think that you showed that to me about a year or so ago.
Yeah, it's some really good shit.
And
we got to
he's
talk about Bloodbath on the show sometime.
And he's pretty much doing a lot of his old school stuff using this way, right? So you might think that maybe he's just...
Well, he's not in Bloodbath anymore. They actually replaced him with the singer of Paradise Lost.
Huh.
Which is really interesting. But that's I'm sorry, I've meandered way off the topic, but basically what I'm saying is that they handled this change very tastefully.
Oh yes, like the comparison to In Flames, it is apt because this could have been way, way worse.
It could have been. And again, I think that the worst thing that the band could have done career-wise was to put out another Blackwater Park, to put out another Deliverance. I think that would have come across as cheap, almost in the same way that there are aspects of Watershed that seem a little manufactured. That seem a little bit more, well, this is what the fans want to hear.
You think so?
I think so. I think they put their own special touch in it. I think they did it very tastefully. But there are aspects of Watershed where I'm like...
You think by the time they were done with Ghost Reveries, they were ready to go full Pale Communion?
I think so. I think they were ready to go full bore into more of the progressive rock stuff.
Interesting.
But I think there may have been a little bit of we can't just do that. So I guess that's...
I guess we'll never know until they come out and say so, either way.
Right. So, Mike, do you have any final thoughts on Opeth?
Opeth in general, a band that has continued to change and still keep my attention for this long. Definitely one of the greats. Like I said, that ghostly, weird feeling of unease, that ominous character, along with just this bittersweet quality and stuff like the very last track off of Ghost Reveries. Go back to that. It's my baby. Where he talks about reading a letter, which is basically a cross between either like one of the most regretful breakup letters or someone's died in a war. You're not really sure which, but I don't know. The ability to creep you out, to make you feel like this manly rush whenever the death vocals just sweep over you. And Still Life is a great example of that, coming to the fore. And then just juxtaposing it with stuff like the end of Ghost Reveries, how it just kind of I don't want to say fizzle. It doesn't. I almost said fizzles out, but more like just fades away in this bittersweet quality. I don't know. There's few bands that get me like this on so many different levels, but Opeth is there in my heart.
Very good.
Dan, what about you?
I think Opeth is an incredible band. They're a band that I'm still going to buy the records, even if I'm not 100% into them. I think they're eventually going to circle back around to something that is more up my alley. It may be death metal, it may not be. You know, I enjoyed listening to the Smiths too. So if we ever get there, I'm on board. So I think that Opeth is going to continue to amaze, and I'm glad to see that they are doing what they want to do unapologetically.
And that authenticity, I think, is there's so many bands that don't have that and haven't had that. But whenever I hear something from Opeth and I don't really like it right off the bat, at least I don't feel like I'm being lied to.
I think that Opeth is one of the few examples of a band where you can't pick an album and listen to it. Opeth is a band, once you're on board, you have to listen to the band as a whole. There are aspects of that approach that come from jazz, where you're not just listening to Miles Davis play So What for the 1000th time. You're listening to the band and the way the song is being played. Opeth played death metal at one point, and then they kind of modified it and just twisted it a little bit and made it their own. And then you had Deliverance and Damnation, where we kind of slipped in this progressive rock thing a little bit. And then over time, they just kind of started making music the way that they want to. It's not like listening to Metallica, where you can listen to their thrash, and then you listen to their not thrash, and then you listen to their thrash, and you pick the album that defines them. I think Opeth is a band that if you listen to one record and say, that is Opeth, it's just wrong in 2018. You could have got away with it a few years ago of saying, yeah, Blackwater Park is Opeth, and I probably would have agreed with you. But now, Opeth is just a band of really talented musicians with one guy staying at the front and saying, this is what we're going to do today.
But that brings up a point that I think we've been a little remiss. We've spoken so much about Mike this, Mike that. We haven't really had much of a shout out to the other guys who've been involved in this band.
There's a lot of names.
Martin Mendez, I mean, he's in the band since almost the beginning, right?
Yeah, bass player since 97.
And these men are incredibly talented. I mean, if a band is very much the sum of everyone's input into it, signature sounds get carried on by the new members, but
there's a total of 20 members over the course of time.
And in a situation like that, I think we do attribute a lot to Michael, but I mean, it's not totally off base in the sense that he's clearly the driving force behind the band. It's kind of like when we talked about Project 86. We were Schwab this, Schwab that.
Schwab.
But, the reality is, that was his band, and I think in a lot of ways, Opeth really is Michael Ockerfeld. And it's not to say that other guys can't give their ideas or give their input, but I think that he's clearly the main influence in the band. And I apologize if the other band members are listening that we didn't bring you up, but if that's the case, get in touch with us and we'll give you your own episode. So
I actually looked up, I was always wondering, Opeth, where does that come from? Apparently it comes from a book called The Sunbird. It was like an adventure archaeologist book about a city in South Africa called Opeth, without the H on the end. And I actually picked up that book, so I'm going to read it and see because I know that the name was not made up by Mike or any of the present band members, of course, but it was left to those who were here before Mike joined the band, actually. So I'm going to look into that.
This has been Literature Discussion with Mike.
It looks like a poor man's Indiana Jones, but we'll see.
Well, for a few people that are going to be listening to this episode, this was very old school, and they know exactly what I mean, so Mike, thanks for hanging out with us, man.
It was a pleasure, guys.
You're going to have to come back and talk about some more evil metal.
Evil. Only the evilest.
So, Dan, I know we said we were going to talk about it. We'll mention it real quick.
Okay.
For our Patreon subscribers, we are going to be giving a little bit more to you for $1.
Well, $1 a month on our Patreon page will give you access to Patreon-only content. And what we mean by that is that if you just can't get enough discography discussion, you want to hear us go a little bit more in depth on individual albums as opposed to our normally macro way of covering bands. You know, we may cover 12 albums in 2 hours. Obviously, sometimes that's not enough time to talk about everything about a record. So what we're going to do is we're going to sit down for 20 minutes, 30 minutes at a time, and we will do a album review on an individual record. And if you are kind enough to support our podcast via Patreon, you will get access to that. And it's only $1. It's only $1 per month contribution, and you'll get access to a special feed that has those individual album reviews. So definitely look out for those. Those will probably start coming next month.
So what's your album of the week, Dan?
Oh, mine is Between the Buried and Me, Automata 1. Wait, Automata. Automata? I don't know.
Mike, what about you?
I don't know how to pronounce anything.
Fuck, I don't know. I'll say Pale Communion. It was the last album I listened to all the way through. Listened to Sorceress before Pale Communion.
For me, it's the self-titled Coal Chamber. Today was one of those days, if you know what I mean.
I feel you.
There you go.
And on that note, this has been episode 59 of Discography Discussion. Thank you for listening. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at discussmetal. Subscribe to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Google Play, iTunes, and Stitcher. Visit discussmetal.com for all things discography discussion, and please send questions and comments to danandjoeshow@gmail.com. If you are not a patron, you can become one at patreon.com/discussmetal. We have some sweet perks.
All right, the Leper Affinity. Let's get to the bottom of this. We entered winter once again, naked, freezing from my breath. Neath the lid, all limbs tucked away. This coffin is your abode from now and onwards. Your body is mine to avail. Such a tragic sight you are, slave under my creed, spurring me with those tears. I am beyond death, midst a dreaming affinity. Saving strength now, faint whispers come, erotic communion in its splendor. Okay, yeah, he's fucking a corpse.
Yeah, it's a little hard to get over that. Hey, kid, can't get past that.
You want to see a dead body?